is one thing. The next thing is the mobility. From now on, in the Bologna process, anybody can study anywhere and get recognized for credit hours anywhere else. Furthermore, employers, should recognize your degree from Spain just as much as the one from Germany if it's in electrical engineering. So it's that kind of employer-related harmonization, which to some extent for the employers is still somewhat difficult to accept or get used to. And alternatively, you study electrical engineering 2 years in Spain, you continue and learn Spanish in the process, and you continue in France or in Germany, and etc. And you accumulate credit hours, and then you have a transcript, and the transcript in the Bologna reform includes more than just the course and the credit hour. Every course for which you got credit hours has a small description on what was covered in the course. So it has a quantitative and a qualitative dimension, which is called the diploma supplement, is then more than just the transcript in the American sense. It has a supplemental qualitative statement to it. So you could go every semester or every year, or whatever reason, theoretically from one country to another. In the end, you are a bachelor in electrical engineering from Finland, and this should be accepted. That's the vision. So the mobility should be possible, and mobility was enforced by an incentive structure. The incentive structure is we pay you, particularly student and faculty, if you begin to cooperate across borders in degree programs. So suddenly you had universities involved in joint degrees, or in, let's say, dual degrees, or in all kinds of variations of graduating people with cooperation. A joint degree would mean 2, 3, or 4 universities from different countries would agree on a curriculum content, and they say any bachelor degree will have the signature of all universities involved in that educational process. A dual degree would be you can get the degree either from University A or University B, depending on where you just happen to be at the end of graduation, but we agree on the content of the curriculum, etc., etc. So to coordinate, to come up with the coordination of such efforts, faculty was paid by European funds, students were paid small stipends when they participated, and cost of living and transport, let's say, expenses. And this still is going on, and it worked wonders. It was just amazing what creativity came out. Initially, when I was involved in this process, it was dominated by skepticism. There was a north-south divide, kind of like your educational system is not as good as ours. So why should we work with a Sicilian university that is mafia country, and etc. And people really had to learn to accept each other and value each other for whatever resources could be brought to this system of cooperation. This didn't happen without friction, but it happened ever more smoothly and ever more efficiently. And then the students, of course, had to get used to taking whatever the substantive field was in another country, abstract and take some distance to, for instance, medicine as it was practiced in Germany, or social work as it was practiced in France, and etc., etc. So you really had to become less ethnocentric and accept the other, let's say, national character of a certain field and the particularities of a certain field. So it would be like going to California and learning how they do and appreciate and begin to appreciate how they do things there, or in the Deep South, how they do things there and appreciate it. Something which is not self-evident even in the United States, which has, lived with a similar system as the Bologna Declaration for quite a long time. And as a sideline, you could ask the question, is the Bologna Declaration an emulation of the US system? I would say for the most part it tends that way, but it has enough difference left that it is not. One of the differences is historical. So some fields say in a 3-year study program we cannot possibly introduce into the discipline enough, and we would rather have 3.5 years to a bachelor at full workloads, or 4 years to a bachelor, but then make the master's degree shorter. So just a year master's degree. So you have this kind of, and this may be a regional or national approach to coming up with a bachelor. It may be a discipline approach to coming up with a bachelor, meaning, by the time you have a bachelor in philosophy, you have been introduced to do some most rudimentary stuff, but essentially you are not skilled enough to think enough on a basic level like a philosopher with a bachelor's degree. Therefore, we give a 4-year, only 4 years after a bachelor, and then with an additional effort we give you a master's. So it's that kind of, and then it also, those who have been in Germany, like Callan and others, know that some programs like in education or in other fields were 4-year programs, and they had about the equivalency of a master's, and some were 5-year programs, they had the equivalency, no testing in between, and this flexibility accommodates for these national and discipline differences in the educational process. That's why it's rigid very much on the workload system, but even here you have some tolerance, because it may be in the eye of the beholder to estimate how much workload is involved, and therefore 25 to 30 is a kind of a rough estimate. However, when you are accredited, you will be taken to task on it. You will have to show to the accrediting body what the curriculum does, what workload is being used for, etc. And in that sense, you're being measured quantitatively also on the workload basis, which is not happening now in the United States as a comparison. So in some ways, this workload definition then also serves, or start to serve, as a quality measure, because in the United States you have all the discourse, and to some extent useless discourse, where can you get a bachelor's degree for very little effort, and then the other side is, where can you buy a bachelor's degree for no effort? So you have all this spectrum of, of discussion rising from a lack of definition of the workload, and not the workload not being part of the accreditation process. And believe me, we have to get used to it. to no end. I mean, it was soul searching when I had to design my modules. So this will be a modular system. When I had to design my courses as modules, or as, I'll say a bit more about modules, I had to very much think about the workload. While before I was in a spontaneous process, of course, students will do this for me, and of course they cannot do this for me, and I had to introspect on the workload basis quite a bit, and everybody. Then the question is, if you have this as a bachelor's degree and it's modularized, do you modularize the curriculum into 6 parts, or do you modularize the curriculum into 12 parts, or into 24 parts, or whatever? So much of the discussion, every module then is equipped with a certain number of credit hours. Now, do you work and do you modularize it down to 3 units of credit hour or 6 units of credit hour? And then that is as such very controversial, because in the previous higher education systems, typically the students would hang around or work around and work a lot or less or whatever, and then they had to sign up for an exam after 2 years, which was then called kind of like basic exam to go on or not. But what I mean to say, it was huge undefined space of learning, not defined in large modules, not defined in small modules. It was just a space of time that could be absorbed. And very often students still reminisce the old times, saying, learning is not just a workload issue. Learning is hanging around in pubs and meeting people and etc. and at parties, or of having informal discourse that the university will and can never arrange. But learning takes place at many places, and we bemoan the fact that we are now workloaded into modules. And the compromise there is you can, and furthermore, the other argument is by the time you have taken an intro to social course, the module is over, and the introduction is kind of stifled. And why not create a bigger module, let's say a 6-hour instead of a 3-hour introduction to sociology? And this is possible. So these debates have then, let's say, resulted in curricula with small modules, and I call it like the American system, or with kind of medium-sized modules that range over two semesters, let's say Introduction to Sociology, 2 semesters. And then, of course, you get from the other side, and the mobility side, and the biographical side, you get the question, couldn't I conclude every semester the modules I have taken? Because next semester I will not be here because my parents are sick, or because I'm pregnant and I need to be home. And why do you organize a 2-semester cycle module for introduction to sociology? Well, every sociologist would have plenty of reasons to say, well, we just need 2 semesters. We need 6 credit hours, and not just 3. Every philosopher, lots of disciplines could come up with these kind of arguments, but then the reality of life intrudes, and then you have the debate about it. How much of a curriculum should be modular small, or medium, or large? And with a transcript and the supplemental part to it, which is qualitative, you could easily do a medium or large module because you have credit hours. In the large, you might have 9 credit hours, and then the supplemental description will tell you exactly what was covered. So it's not a matter of content or hiding content, and also what the course will do, the large module will be measured here. So it's not a problem of measurement or transparency. The problem is that it may interfere with people's lives and biography and need to work and all kinds of stuff. So I would say most systems have gone more towards small, like American modular or class organization, and not the large, even though there was much opposition against this modularization from probably the humanities more than the technical sciences or the sciences, particularly the humanities. Then I'm now at point 10. Explicit or not, the Bologna reform assumes you have lifelong learning. But lifelong learning is only that's meaningful in the context of ever-shifting labor markets and, let's say, rearrangements of the division of labor. You know, if in the context of globalization, entire fields of labor markets vanish or decrease, others increase or come up. So you have in this, with this speed to globalization as we have seen it, you have significant disruption in people's work biographies. So you need to learn lifelong. So, and the Americans do it extremely well, and the Europeans with this system are now also able to go into lifelong learning. You have a bachelor that equips you with a certain knowledge. You can get another bachelor, and then you do the transcript, which is also qualitative. People will tell you you can now get a shade different to your bachelor's degree and a second bachelor. So you pile on bachelors or pile on masters or whatever dynamic is then useful to your lifelong learning process. And in the lifelong learning process, you have accommodation to specialization and work biographies, but you also have, an intimate connection of the curriculum with the world of work. And that's another very intended intended dimension of the curricular reform. Every bachelor's degree is supposed to be anchored also in a niche of the labor market. The humanities in particular were amazingly angry and amazingly challenged at the same time to even give bachelor degrees. You studied literature and a long time without modularization. You just absorbed and appropriated the knowledge of a language and its literature and its philosophy to it and whatever else. And then you were graduated with about master level kind of diploma with very few exams in between, very little modular structure, maybe seminar papers, etc. And then suddenly now they have to give you a bachelor's degree that's relevant to the labor market because it's part of lifelong learning and that kind of dimension. And then the debate is still hot for certain disciplines, Also medicine, for instance, since in Europe we didn't have the institution of pre-med, which would be about like a bachelor's degree. You would enter medical school and become a doctor on the way. You know, suddenly the medical schools have to introduce labor market relevant bachelor's degree. And how do you do that? So that is where some professions and also law would be there, still have problems adjusting and making their course of study relevant to work biographies in connection with the life market, with the labor market. So, for instance, you know, philosophy or sociology. Let's take sociology. A bachelor in sociology, you can't do anything. Is that true or not? Well, if combined with journalism, you have a labor market content. If combined with survey, and there's a huge industry of survey taking and evaluation, you have a labor market. So you need to prepare bachelor level sociologists to those niches, you know. I mean, it's then almost creating a curriculum is then almost also part of becomes an entrepreneurial activity. You become aware that you shouldn't train and have people waste time and money. Money is not so much a problem in the public education system as it is funded in Europe, but time certainly is a problem. And the question, what can I do with a bachelor's in philosophy? I love philosophy, but what can I do with it is a problem, it's an issue, just as much as in psychology or sociology, less so maybe in engineering. And less so in mathematics. You know, the mathematicians on a bachelor level will give you the tools to work for the insurance industry or something like this. So, but for certain professions, it really was a big challenge. Then, the social policy dimensions of the reform. First, you can combine work and study in a spontaneous way. So you could now argue that the entire element that's called the stipend kind of welfare state branch, which, and what do stipends do? They enable some segments of society an education that otherwise might not. So it has a social policy function. But then you can argue, you can cut down on this social policy expenditure by structuring the curriculum close to the labor market and by allowing full-time and part-time study and in and out kind of behavior in the labor market, out the labor market, etc. So it is less costly in terms of social policy because social policy is now a bit more labor market income and less state subsidy or kind of stipend income. Then you can argue also in terms of unemployment, you know, getting a degree that's not useful, getting a degree that, go ahead, just go ahead. Getting a degree that's not useful just produces unemployment. And as soon as the push is to make it relevant to the labor market, you can cut down on unemployment and therefore on welfare state flanking measures like unemployment insurance. So that would be some of the elements coming from social policy, public administration elements. The old system, everything was tied to the bureaucrats and the Ministry of Education. The professors and everybody was employed by the Ministry of Education. Now, suddenly, with the Bologna reform,